Hello everyone, this is Indranil Sen from Uppsala University, manager of the project SoFiA, soap film based artificial photosynthesis. Also I wear a second hat, which is the director of Wasabi Innovations. It's a startup company which is based in SoFiA and is currently going to be incubated at the SoFiA Tech Park, from where I am this broadcast is streaming. So today is the second day for the first online workshop for Project SoFiA, which is soap film based artificial photosynthesis, and the title is A Connecting Bridge, Soap Films and Artificial Photosynthesis. Today we will have 6 talks, 6 presentations, and the first one is going to be on artificial photosynthesis with molecularly engineered materials by Professor Erwin Reisner from University of Cambridge. And then we are going to have a 3-minute break, and then the next set of talks will begin. So I request Professor Reisner to start the talk. I cannot hear him. Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
For organizing this online workshop. Let me share my slides. Can you see it okay?
Yes.
So my name is Erwin Reisner. I'm from the University of Cambridge, and I'm also part of the SoFiA project, which aims to develop soap bubbles to develop artificial photosynthesis. But today I will talk more about the materials angle, which I think is useful to contrast the state of the art with soap film developments in the future. So I've narrowed down my talk a little bit because of the limited time, and I will be talking about essentially integrated devices, standalone devices that can produce solar fuels, and these are also known as artificial leaves, sheets, and panels. So if you can see my video, anything that's a thin integrated device, you can consider as an artificial leaf, and effectively this is meant to convert solar energy to produce some fuels. So if we think artificial leaves, of course we need to first contrast with the natural leaf. So here on the right hand side, I believe you can see my cursor, you see a plant leaf, or an illustration of a plant leaf, which performs natural photosynthesis. So here the function of the leaf is to convert water and carbon dioxide and to produce sugars. Sugars are a great structural material and also very useful for energy storage. And what we try to develop here is more synthetic artificial systems that have a similar function. So also here we try to use something like water and carbon dioxide to produce fuels. We are less interested in sugars, but we are more interested in something like hydrogen or some liquid carbon-based fuels that can be produced. If we look at the form, maybe they're not so similar. I think beyond being flat and hopefully thin, that's the analogy. And that's also why, again, they have the name of leaves, sheets, and panels. So how do these thin light-driven systems actually work? Here's a very simplistic representation. So first of all, we need some water solution, a bath, if you like. And in this bath, you take these integrated sheets, the materials, and then you expose them to sunlight. And the exposure of sunlight now drives a chemical reaction. And now what the sheets can do, they can either use the water, carbon dioxide, or even some waste in the form of biomass or plastics to produce fuels and chemicals. And that's of our main interest at the moment, and certainly for this talk. So there has been good progress on such systems over the years. The system has been proposed quite a long time ago, and the first practical devices really have been pioneered by the groups of Nocera, Katsunari Domen, and a few others. And here's just one picture. What they show is indeed, if you put such a sheet into an aqueous solution, shine light on them, they can evolve hydrogen. However, current systems have been limited to the conversion of water into hydrogen, and more complex chemistry has still been a big struggle in the community. But before we go into the catalysis and the conversion of carbon dioxide and waste into fuels, I just want to briefly summarize again why we're interested in solar energy and also in fuels. So Leif Hammarström has discussed this already very nicely yesterday, but just as a reminder that solar energy really is very abundant, as we know, and it has become very cheap and arguably the cheapest form to produce renewable electricity. So the hope is here that we can actually make chemicals using sunlight. And the case for fuels, we do need electricity. We want to have more renewable electricity, but we still have to address the big global demand of fuels. So this is just a comparison, also similar numbers yesterday. We are close to a power demand globally of 20 terawatts, and really the vast majority is still being used in the form of fuels. And we do not currently have a large-scale solution to produce fuels sustainably. So there's a big need for better catalysis and for sustainable means to make fuels. So how do we see this technology evolving beyond producing hydrogen? So I mentioned before, we can convert water into hydrogen through this water splitting process, but we want to expand the scope of input quite significantly. So can we also use carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, for example, for green sustainable chemistry? And can we even use waste? Can we use biomass or plastics to make chemicals? Biomass here, we are interested in lignocellulosic biomass, which means biomass that's not edible. We do not want to compete with food production. And plastics, of course, now is a big pollution problem today. Can we recycle it again into useful products? And today's talk will really be looking at sunlight-driven processes. This is artificial photosynthesis, not just to make hydrogen, but also some interesting carbonaceous compound or carbon-containing molecules. So you can see two here. One is carbon monoxide. That the general public may not think very highly of carbon monoxide, as it's a very poisonous gas. But in fact, carbon monoxide is a really important and useful energy carrier. And it's already used in the petrochemical industry on a large megaton scale. And it can be used to make all sorts of different chemicals, including liquid hydrocarbons, which can be used as fuels. And we're also interested in formic acid because it's a liquid, and it can either be used also directly in fuel cells that are under development, or it can be further converted or in biorefineries or other processes to interesting chemicals. So with these vectors, we can use them either directly, or we convert them into different chemicals by established chemical industrial processes. And this allows us the production of either liquid fuels. We can now call this, let's say, green gasoline, to keep it very simplified, because we can make liquid hydrocarbons. And as we are making them from carbon dioxide in the first place, in fact, they will be green and renewable. But we can go further. We can make chemicals. So from this mixture of carbon monoxide, hydrogen, you can start making plastics. We can use the hydrogen to make fertilizer. We can use renewable hydrogen to support the steel manufacturing. And there are many possibilities to transform really the chemical industry also into a more sustainable industry. And last but not least, we can just convert it back into electricity. And as I mentioned, we're interested in a circular economy, which means once we have consumed our output, it will just, in the simplest case, be combusted, and we just reform our water, carbon dioxide, or waste, and we can just produce it again in this process. So the key question is, how can we go beyond making hydrogen, and how can we go into more complex chemistry? How can we activate and convert carbon dioxide in particular? Also here, I'm very grateful to Leif Hammarström yesterday, because he has already explained some of the challenges from conventional solid state catalysts. So there has been a lot of development of catalysts for carbon dioxide reduction. And without recapitulating everything that has been said yesterday, the conclusion is scaling relationships really prevent you to have a very efficient catalysis, which means you usually end up with large overpotential, which means energy losses, or range of products, or actually both of them. So there are now many innovative approaches how to improve catalysis. And here's just a brief summary slide that attempts to categorize the approaches to improve carbon dioxide reactivity in particular. So we have a carbon dioxide molecule approaching a catalytic surface, and then it's all about stabilizing these intermediates. So the more we can control this, the higher the likelihood for us to have an efficient catalysis and to have clean conversion into products. There are many possibilities. We can think about electronic modification of an catalytic site by either some spectators on a catalytic surface. We can use support effects in that we deposit the catalyst on top of another substrate. or we can use molecular catalysts. I will mainly be talking about molecular catalysts today. And in the molecular catalysis, as in solid state chemistry, we can and should use functional groups to stabilize this intermediate. So these can be proton relays and other effects that really can stabilize and bring these intermediates under control for more efficient catalysis. And that's what I mentioned, really what we are doing. So when I talk about these sheets here today, we use very often classical solid state semiconducting materials or materials known from the photovoltaics field, but our specialty is more than integrating this catalyst with these materials. And if we choose the right catalyst under the right conditions, we can start really converting carbon dioxide into useful chemicals and also do different sorts of other chemistries. And this is usually being done by using a catalyst, a molecular catalyst, and this is integrated via a ligand and anchor on the semiconductor surfaces. Before I delve into some of our latest results, there has been already some progress recently, in particular in Japan. And here on the left-hand side, you see one example from Morikawa. I will not discuss it in detail, but what they are using is a polymeric ruthenium bispiperidine catalyst, and that's polymerized on top of an indium phosphide p-type semiconductor. And this one can then be wired up to a photoanode with another semiconductor to achieve overall conversion of carbon dioxide to formic acid. On the right-hand side, you see another molecular photoelectrochemical tandem cell. This is from the group of Ishitani and Abe. And what they are doing here also on the photocathodic side, where we produce the fuel, we have an array of rhenium and ruthenium, a diode, and also here we can convert carbon dioxide into carbon monoxide. So these systems are very nice illustrations that these systems potentially can work, but often they still have some drawbacks like precious metals being employed, here with an applied bias and other limitations. So there's still a lot of scope to development, and it's very early stage. The first system I'd like to present is work by Virgil Andre in my research group, and it's effectively a tandem system for syngas generation. So what is syngas? Syngas is a gas mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and we produce this syngas from carbon dioxide and water. And syngas is what is being extremely important in the chemical industry, and what I mentioned before can be used to produce hydrocarbons. And here on the anodic side, again, we oxidize water to oxygen in order to source the electrons that we require to reduce our carbon dioxide and water. So how the system works, it's a tandem system in that it relies on two light absorbers. The first light absorber is a bismuth vanadate photoanode, and the photocathode is a lead halide perovskite element that's commonly employed now in photovoltaic cells. And what we're doing is we're essentially sandwiching in these two semiconductors with two catalysts. One catalyst produces syngas, and the second one is our oxygen evolution catalyst. And this really was the outcome of a center we had for 7 years. When we started off, the ambition was to develop a standalone device to make syngas under these conditions, and indeed last minutes we succeeded. And I guess that's typically the case when you have a deadline. At some stage you really start to focus, and we could show that this is actually feasible. So what you see here now is this leaf in the center. So this is the glass cell now, so that you can better see the bubbles. And the light comes from the left. And indeed, on the right-hand side, we see the evolution of syngas. And on the left-hand side, the oxygen is coming out. So these systems work still with low efficiencies, but you can see the evolution of, indeed, the gaseous products in these systems. The simplified scheme here does not do really much justice to the layered design that was necessary to make this work. And I will not discuss it in any detail, but you should actually see it requires a combination of many different layers and materials, and they all need to be tuned and optimized to operate with the best possible performance. So one example would be these lead halide perovskites are arguably the worst possible material to use in such a device because they're extremely moisture sensitive. So what you need to do is you really need to encapsulate them if you want to keep them in solution so that they do not degrade very quickly. And we've managed to do this quite well. So you can see here the perovskite layering, and then we sandwich this within a nickel oxide hole transport layer. There's a fullerene type electron transport layer, and then we have another couple of sealants before we come to a nanotube electrode, if you like, or material that now is impregnated with our molecular catalyst. And this catalyst is a cobalt porphyrin catalyst which is responsible for the generation of the syngas. So this is really key for the chemistry. A second example I wanted to show is from Jian Wang, and what she developed are indeed known as these photocatalyst sheets. This was a collaboration with Katsunari Domen. And what you can see is here, it's quite different from the previous system where we had many different layers. Here we have semiconducting nanoparticles that are deposited on a conducting substrate. So this means here the photocatalysis and everything occurs on the same side of the sheet. Before in the leaf we had it on opposite sides, here it's all on the same side. This comes with some performance advantages. And how this really works on the chemical aspect. So if we look at the different semiconductors that we have deposited on the substrate, we have now a strontium titanate semiconductor that's connected again to one of our molecular catalysts. So this is a bis-dipyridine cobalt catalyst. And this catalyst now can convert carbon dioxide with very high selectivity in water to formic acid. So we think this is a real achievement to have a selectivity of 97% in water, because usually you end up with a range of different carbon products and co-evolution of hydrogen. And in this case, we really see barely any hydrogen, and formate is really the main product in the system. The catalysis is very intriguing because you see a coordinated cobalt complex. And what we believe is happening in the catalysis is while we go into the catalytic cycle, just one of this pyridine opens up a vacant site for the CO2 to coordinate and being turned over to formate. And then this fuel making system is connected to a bismuth vanadate water oxidation system that's more conventional, I would say. And the last system I'd like to show are the same type of sheets and systems can be used to convert waste. So we do not need to stop at carbon dioxide and water. We can think of anything we have abundantly available and we can utilize. And in this case, we look at plastics and biomass that I've mentioned before, because we really look at these two as substrates and as extremely valuable resources. And we believe they're valuable because they're rich in chemical composition. So they're nice feedstock to harvest carbon, for example, but they're also rich in energy. So biomass or cellulose is effectively the product for photosynthesis. So we can actually start off with a quite high energy form of a substrate, which makes the fuel formation much easier from a thermodynamic point of view. And that's also the reason why we only need one light absorber in the systems, whereas for the previous systems where we coupled the syngas generation and the formic acid generation to water oxidation, we required 2 light absorbers because it's just more difficult to run the chemistry, again, from a purely energetic point of view. So what we have here is a single light absorbing particle. And if you shine the light on the system, you can really start breaking down. Let's take the simplest example, plastics. We can go either to carbonate, or we can even produce some organics that we hope in the future will also provide value. And this decomposition reaction is now coupled to the conversion of water into hydrogen. And this is really the work from Taylor Uckert in my group. And you can see, again, all of this happening on such panel systems. So here we have our photocatalyst deposited on the panel. And when we shine light, indeed, hydrogen is being evolved and our waste is being converted into organics. Just to illustrate how this photocatalyst works, I have this brief movie here. So what you see now in this test tube, this is not our photocatalyst sheet. This is just a slice of a PET water bottle. So these drinking bottles you use, hopefully not on a daily basis, but occasionally you will use a water bottle. If you just slice it up, take the PET and coat the PET with our photocatalyst. In this specific case, it's cadmium sulfide quantum dots, and put them into a solution, in this case an alkaline solution. You can see when we shine light on them, it's a solar irradiation, that these photocatalysts take up the light and now start decomposing the plastics. They simply start photo-oxidizing the plastics, and as they start degrading the plastics, this goes hand in hand with the generation of hydrogen, which you will see in the form of these bubbles. So I think this shows quite nicely what these photocatalysts can do, and at the moment we are just building and have built these panels and try to really establish this with more continuous processing. Okay, I think my time is already running out, so I want to wrap up. So all I wanted to show is a few examples where materials can be used for solar fuel synthesis, really with an emphasis on the sheet or leaf type systems. There are many different forms, There's a large part of the community works on photoelectrochemical cells. People work on powder systems, but this should just give an idea how these materials look like. Again, that we get an idea how to contrast with the SoFiA project more broadly. So from our lab, the first standalone device that could produce hydrogen was assembled by a former postdoc in my group, Jia-Yu Lin. And this is our first system. You can see a photoelectrochemical cell. This on the right-hand side is only the solar light simulator with 2 electrodes, with a membrane here, and generally still quite bulky and clunky, if you like. And the hydrogen production efficiency was 0.11%. So it was a standalone device, but the performance was not great, and we really were limited to hydrogen. And this marked more or less the start of the Doppler laboratory. And today we could expand the chemistry quite significantly. So we have quite a good handle, I would say, on carbon dioxide conversion, meaning we can produce carbon monoxide even at quite high selectivities. Today I've only showed syngas, but we can go to much higher carbon monoxide concentrations or amounts. We can produce formic acid with very high selectivity, and we have also gone into waste recycling to broaden our chemical scope significantly. And if you see here how thin our systems are now, so this is a little tweezer, and that's one of the systems by Virgil Andre, they really become tiny and quite handy. The chemistry is more complex and diverse, and also the systems become significantly more efficient. Which challenges stay ahead? And this is not just challenges for us, but for the community in the broadest sense, efficiency. So very often, rough number efficiency of 10% will be needed for commercialization. Also, our systems are quite significantly below this value at the moment. Stability will be required to operate for years. In our cases, usually we test them up to a week. So some of our panels or systems can operate for longer than a week, but still we will not run them much longer than a couple of weeks at present, which is not enough. And of course, scalability. Can we really produce square meters, square kilometers for the systems to produce meaningful amounts of products? And also here we need to look into cost. That's why it's important to get rid of precious metals, for example, and environmental impact. So we also don't want to use in the longer term any sort of toxic materials. And when we think about the challenges ahead, I think it's still important to think about alternative approaches. And that's why I really want to highlight the SoFiA project, because there are really some of these challenges that can be addressed, stability being one of them. And also it was already discussed that these soap films are nice in a way because they can very easily be formed, disrupted, and reformed. So there's a possibility to regenerate our system. And also scalability. A soap film arguably can be formed very easily on a very large scale. So we're very hopeful and believe in the future that SoFiA can help to provide a solution to our challenges remaining. Here I'd like to stop here, the funding sources that are supporting this work. Our group picture from actually last year. This year we only managed to have this little online picture. Our group marks 10 years, so we are celebrating socially distantly. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Erwin. Thank you for such a wonderful lecture. And now we take a 3-minute break, and we will come back in 3 minutes. Thank you. There's a question, but the questions we will answer a little later. Bye. So we meet after 3 more minutes. Hello and welcome again. Now there's a next talk is by Rahul Gera, Dr. Rahul Gera from Amolf in Netherlands, and the topic is going to be spectroscopy of surfactant decorated water surface by the SFG technique. Dr. Gera, please.
Yeah, I'll start my screen. Share. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, great. So So first of all, I'd like to thank Indra for organizing an SoFiA project, where we essentially introduce to the general mass about the aspect of the SoFiA consortium, where we aim to essentially perform chemical reactions under a particular platform. And Amol's role is essentially to look the platform of this system from a spectroscopic point of view. And for this, we essentially employ a technique specifically called some frequency generation. But before going into the details of what we do and how we are going to work on this system, I think the platform has been set up really well by Erwin and previous speakers, essentially, where they've talked intensively about one specific kind of reaction. So one of the general kind of reactions, one way to classify reactions is homogeneous reaction and heterogeneous reactions. Homogeneous reactions are essentially where the reactants, the products essentially which are participating in a reaction are in the same phase. And if I now put electrodes and put an external bias to a reaction where the reaction is indeed not happening in the bulk phase or in the solution phase, but essentially happening at the interface of two different phases, that reaction is called heterogeneous reaction. And again, people before me have set up this aspect of heterogeneous reactions very well, and I'll not go into the details of it. And they've shown you quite a lot of examples. Now, the holy grail of chemistry essentially is where chemists are essentially trying to understand structure, dynamics, and functions of a particular systems. They tweak certain aspect of a structure, they get a new function, and they see that their system is essentially performing with different dynamics. So these things are very well correlated. But for today's talk, I'll essentially focus on the structure of the system chemist likes to probe essentially at the interface. And let's see what are the general techniques that people use to look at structures. Now, people or chemists, researchers essentially use X-ray or electron diffractions if the samples are solids, and they get atomic coordinates. If they have a magnetically active nuclei, they can use a technique called nuclear magnetic resonance. Or if they have a spectrometer with a mid-IR frequency range, or they have a light source, they can essentially do optical spectroscopy where they can look at the vibrations of on a molecule. So using vibrations, they can look at local structures, as well as they can look at get information about the surroundings of the chemical reaction or the reactants which are participating in the reaction. Now, majority of these techniques have been employed to look at the bulk structure or bulk information. But again, like I said, the importance of today's lecture, or what I'm going to talk about, is get the structure at interfaces. And the question that essentially comes from this is why I want to look at interface specific structures. Now, the reason is if you look at the proposed design, this design has several interfaces, or at least a couple of interfaces. The interface one, where you have a catalytic sides and the air, and then there's another catalytic side, and then there's air, and the middle is water. Now, there are reactions happening on a heterogeneous surfaces. And if I now want to look at it from a spectroscopic point of view, I will try to now make this design more and more simpler. I will break it down into this design where I have catalytic moieties shown and photosensitizer shown as these colors, and this is forming the soap film. And to make it much more easier, let's remove the catalytic moieties and look just at the soap films, which is again an interface. And then if I want to actually break it further down, I would look at these surfactant molecules at the water interface. Now, like I said before, I'll be using vibrational markers as a structure at the interface. Now, before going into the details of the technique that I specifically use, let's see how vibrations can be a marker. Now, for a simple molecule like water, the possible vibrations that one can essentially think about is a stretching mode or a bending mode. Now, to easier visualize, if this was a real a conference or a talk, I would have been able to do it physically. physically show you how I'm talking about what I mean by stretching and bending mode. But what you can do is, like, scientists would essentially look at these stretching modes of atoms. Essentially, if they're attached like a spring, they're essentially doing this kind of motion. Or in a bending mode, it is like this. Now, if I now so now on a spectrometer, how it would look like is essentially if I use a mid-IR source or a source of frequencies which matches with the vibrational modes of stretching or bending, it would look something like this. And this is the bulk spectrum. This is the bulk spectrum of water, where frequencies of around 3500 wave number corresponds to a stretching frequency, and the bending corresponds to around 1500 wave numbers. Now, I need to get a similar information at the interface. For that, I use a technique called sum frequency generation. I will not go into the mathematical details of the system. If somebody wants to follow it, there are references mentioned. Please do look into it. It's a really interesting technique. Now, what we do is we use an IR source to essentially excite the molecules, and to look at our detectors, we couple it with the visible light. This technique is only possible with short laser pulses with that has high amount of energy density. And this process ensures what you get is an information only from the interface, and your bulk processes are forbidden. So this SFG light will only be created at the interfaces. So whatever vibrations that you essentially do a resonance with is coming from the interface. This SFG light is not generated from the bulk. So whatever you get is a surface specific information. Now, so the bulk spectrum, which was essentially looking, as I showed in the previous slide, like this, in the stretching region, would now look something like this, which essentially tells you that there is a similarity between a normal IR spectrum and an SFG spectrum. But apart from that, it also accounts for vibrations which are not coupled to other vibrations. So this free OH corresponds to this high frequency mode, which is absent in the bulk, because in bulk, water molecules is talking to other water molecules. So you would not. So the power of the technique is so amazing that you get surface specific information, and you can talk about vibrations which are not coupled as well. Now, a small tweak to this technique can essentially be used where we can not just only talk about the structure, but you can also talk about the orientation. That technique again is called heterodyne detected sum frequency generation. Again, not going into the details. The reference is mentioned here. If somebody wants to look, please go for that reference. So what we can do is essentially look at the orientation. If the OH is pointing upward or it is pointing downwards, using a technique, a slight modification to the sum frequency generation technique, which we can do at ARMOLF over at ARMOLF. Now, what is future of this usage of this technique is that we will employ this technique for the proposed design of the soap films. And what we would be looking at is essentially structure of water when we put surfactant on top of it, when we make it into a film, or when we decorate it with these photosensitizers and catalytic moieties. Now, we at ARMOLF, we are performing the experiments, and we are closely working with people who can theoretically model these systems. And you will essentially hear about this in the upcoming talk. So our partners at ICTP. And with that, I would like to actually thank the team at ARMOLF, which is investing a lot of time into determining the structures at interfaces, and also a team at SoFiA, which is providing samples essentially to to understand this system. And with this, I would like to thank people for their attention, and I would be happy to take questions and suggestions to improve the aspect of this work. Thank you. Indra, I'm done.
Rahul, we were expecting a 20-minute presentation.
Oh,
but,
okay.
So the next presenter is Ali Hassan Ali from ICTP Trieste. So now let me quickly mention that here we are not taking questions and answers, because the question answer sessions will be moderated through comments at the YouTube or the other video sites which will be available on the net. So right now we will have Professor Ali Hassan Ali from International Center for Theoretical Physics, Trieste, and I request Professor Hassan Ali to please share his screen and give the lecture.
Right. Can you hear me, Indra?
Yes.
Okay. Slides?
Yes, but can you go to full screen?
So, full screen. Okay. Everything okay? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. That's me. Sorry. Okay.
In the picture, so I was wondering if we can first see you and we hear a few words from you.
Can't you see me? I have my video on.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So thanks, Indra, and thanks for organizing this dissemination meeting. So as Indra said, the title of my talk is on the atomistic modeling of soap films. And so this is a joint collaboration, in particular with a postdoc in our group, Ricardo Franklin, who is shown in the picture here. So I'm a staff scientist at the International Center for Theoretical Physics, based in Trieste, on the border of Italy and Slovenia. And I work in the condensed matter and statistical physics group. And essentially, our role in SoFiA has been to try to develop atomistic models of these soap films. And what I want to do in my talk is to share with you some of our efforts in this direction. So essentially, before I start, I just want to introduce a bit about what we do, sort of to build your intuition and perspectives on what you're going to see. So essentially, one of the focuses, or the main focus of my work has been asking the question of whether water is a silent spectator in all the different processes that you've heard about through all the various talks. So what role does water play in physical and chemical processes? And if you want to understand that, the thing that one is usually interested in is trying to understand fluctuations in water. And so you just saw these two movies here that I showed you. Our goal is to take, macroscopic scale objects like these water ripples on the surface of glass, and we use a technique called molecular dynamics. Essentially, this is a very powerful tool. I won't go into the details, but essentially, think of it as a way to take a camera and take nice molecular photographs of water molecules and whatever you might be interested to understand the different types of interactions. So we combine atomistic simulations with some smart data mining in an effort to try and understand new physical and chemical systems. Just to give you a bit of context before I get into the problem of soap films, the study of the structure and dynamics of water near interfaces is a century-old problem, and very controversial, lots of interesting debates, and I don't have time to get into all of them, not even a few of them. I just show you here a snippet of some of the big controversies of how water changes near interfaces. And so you see, there are people who think that water is basic near interfaces, others who say that it's acidic. And then there've been some very interesting ideas on how water changes near biological systems, okay? And you're welcome to go to these references if you're interested. So essentially, our contribution to the SoFiA project has been to ask, to try to answer the following question, which is, what are the molecular ingredients of a soap film? And you've seen these pictures on the left. So they've been very nicely introduced by the previous speakers. And so what we've been trying to do is to sort of dissect this junction of the soap film and try to give some fundamental characterization of all the magic that happens in this sandwich here. And so what we've what I'm going to show you today are mostly results coming from these molecular dynamics type simulations of a specific surfactant. This is C12E6 in contact with water. And what I'm going to try and tell you are three different things. Firstly, the elastic properties of these soap films. Secondly, some interesting dielectric properties. And hopefully, if I have some time, tell you a bit about dynamical fluctuations that happen within these soap films. So the first thing you want to do when you want to develop an atomistic model is you want to build a model that you can validate, that you can compare with an experiment. And so thanks to the SoFiA project, we have a whole bunch of interesting input from different experimentalists. And so the first thing we did in an effort to benchmark the elastic properties of the soap film was to compute the surface tension. So you take your water, you put in your surfactant, and the surfactant aggregates at the interfaces. And obviously, this will change the surface tension, so the interactions between the water molecules. And this is something you can measure from the calculations. So this is the number that we get on the left. And our collaborators in SoFiA, Teklis, are able to measure the surface tension when you get to critical micelle concentration. And the agreement is quite reasonable. So this gives us confidence in what we're able to then extract from our simulations. So what are the types of things that we learn? So one of the sort of the interesting surprises that we've discovered in this particular surfactant, the soap film, is that if one looks at the water density versus the density of the hydrophobic and the hydrophilic groups of the surfactant molecule, there's a lot of penetration of water molecules into the surfactant. So it's a very wet surfactant. So that's number one. And number two, it's a rather thick interface. So you see here from these length scales that we're talking about a thick interface of about 2 nanometers. And this is going to become a very important thing that I'll come back to later on in my talk. So I showed on the previous slide some very static pictures of the surfactant, but one of the nice things about MD simulations is that you realize and learn that these things are not static, that these are highly fluctuating and complicated objects. And so, so this is an example of a simulation of the surfactant where you're seeing that it's a highly dynamically evolving thing, and this leads to a lot of conformational heterogeneity in the surfactant. And this is quantified by this figure on the left here. And there's also some interesting net polarization or orientation of these surfactant molecules at the interface. Again, keep this in mind because this is going to be important when we come to the dielectric properties that we observe at the interface. Okay, so I told you at the beginning of my talk that there's some very interesting discussions on the role of water polarization at interfaces. So this is something we can extract from our simulations. And what this figure here is showing you is the net polarization, the orientational polarization, like the ones that you heard in the previous talk by Rahul, of water as you come close to the surfactant. So when you're in the bulk, water is isotropic. Okay, so there's no net polarization, it's zero. But as you get closer to the interface, you see there's this net orientation of polarization of water molecules as you go closer to the surface. And so this is already telling you two things. One is that, again, it's a very thick layer of polarized water. And number two, this net orientation of water is suggestive of the possibility of a surface potential at the interface. One of the other things that we're able to learn from these types of MD simulations is we were able to take snapshots of the types of hydrogen bond patterns that exist in the molecular dynamics. And without going into the details, we have been able to corroborate and interpret some of the SFG measurements of the surfactant that were mentioned by Rahul, the previous speaker. So that's sort of quantified in this slide here. So there are essentially two things you should take away from the slide. So on the left panel are the SFG spectra, and what you see is that when you go from a neat air-water interface, so without surfactant, to a surface with surfactant, there's a red shift in the spectra. And what a red shift in the spectrum means is there's an enhancement of the hydrogen bond interactions. So that's rather surprising and interesting, right? Because you put in all these impurities at an interface, and you might have thought that this disrupts the hydrogen bond network, but in fact, it enhances it. We're able to now understand that by studying the type of hydrogen bond patterns that I showed you on the previous slide. And that's what this figure on the right here aims at quantifying. One of the so everything I told you up to now is a very static correlation, static picture of the surfactant water interface. And so we have another a postdoc in the group who has an expertise in these sort of new modern ways of understanding correlations in big data. And so this is this area of information theory. And essentially what this allows you to do is to measure dynamic correlations between water, surfactant at the interface. And this is quantified in this picture here. Focus on this top panel here. The open white squares are the extent of these dynamic correlations at the air-water interface without surfactant. And when you put in the surfactant, you see you get a huge enhancement in the dynamic correlations. So the surfactant is enhancing the hydrogen bond network and creating a very dynamically correlated system at the interface. Okay, so one of the, I'd say, very interesting things that we've learned from these simulations, given that we have a net orientational polarization, we have a very dynamically correlated surfactant, is that this implies the presence of large electric fields at the interface. And that's quantified in this figure here at the top. You see that in the bulk, the electric field is 0, as you expect. But as you get closer to the interface, you can get electric fields on the order of 1 volt per nanometer. And these electric fields are directed from the vacuum into the surface. And this electric field is an entangled object coming from both the surfactant and the water. Just to point out that, you know, these large electric fields are not special to just soap films. If you took just a glass of water and you looked at the skin of it or the surface of it, you would also find a large electric field. It's just that the length scale over which the electric field is much smaller. Okay, so there's something interesting going on here. This is something that we want to understand a bit better, and there might be some room for taking advantage of this larger window of electric field to do some interesting chemistry. Again, these electric fields are not static. They're highly fluctuating objects. Just to give you a sense of how much they fluctuate, I'm showing you here this plot, which again, we're able to extract from the molecular dynamics simulations of the average electric field and then the range of electric fields that you see because of the fluctuations. And so the fluctuations are huge. Again, of course, it's these fluctuations in the electric field that will ultimately drive interesting chemical reactions. So one of the last things, or second to last things, I want to share with you is well, you know, if there are these large electric fields at soap film junctions, what can we use them for, right? And so this is a very preliminary kind of proof of concept idea where we've taken one of our collaborators' ruthenium-based photosynthesizer objects that's shown in this picture here, and we apply some electronic structure calculations with and without fields in specific directions. And what you see is that by changing the field and its magnitude, and depending on its direction, you can either get no change in the, let's say, the excitation energy, or you can get a huge change in the excitation energy. Okay, and the fluctuations in the field, like the ones I told you in the previous slide, can change the efficiency of an excitation. And so I think there's some very interesting prospects here of how one can use these fluctuations in the field to, to modulate the optical properties of molecules. So finally, the last thing I wanted to mention, I told you about elastic properties, dielectric, and finally dynamics. And so this is a very interesting collaboration with a colleague of mine here at ICTP on trying to use a clock, a molecular clock on the computer to investigate how long it takes particles, so they could be water molecules, for example, to cross different boundaries in different systems. And this is known as a first passage time problem. And essentially, what you can do with this type of a clock, so you measure how long it takes for a particle to cross a particular boundary, you can use the statistics of these times to infer the local diffusion constant of a water molecule or a particle. And so we've applied this technique to the interfaces that I showed you in the previous slides. So the air-water interface and the water surfactant interface. And what you see is quite nice. Is that in the air-water interface, there's an enhancement of the diffusion constant as you go to the vapor phase. But in the surfactant, you have a slowdown in the diffusion constant of about a factor of 2 in a very thick layer of about 2 nanometers. So these are all kind of consistent ideas coming from the statics, the dielectric, and now the dynamics. And finally, of course, within the framework of artificial photosynthesis, one would obviously be interested in how are the gases that are being generated in photosynthesis, how do they diffuse through the surfactant? And so we've begun to look at this problem for carbon dioxide, and this has served as actually very important information for our collaborators at Polito, and you're going to hear from them later on. One of the things we've discovered is that the carbon dioxide gets trapped in the hydrophobic molecules, hydrophobic layers of the surfactant, and we have a preliminary prediction of the spatial dependent CO2 diffusion constant throughout the bulk and then through the surfactant layer. So this is very preliminary, but it's a work in progress. So let me conclude. Essentially, the goal of my talk was essentially to ask the following question, which is, how do soap films look like at the molecular scale? What I've tried to show you is that these soap film interfaces are extremely complicated. And there are 3, let's say, important things that you should take away from it. One is, with this particular surfactant, we have a 2 nanometer thick layer. Its morphology is made up of very fluxional surfactant molecules with water penetrated inside. And the fluctuations of these 2 objects together lead to very interesting dielectric properties as seen by these large electric field fluctuations. So with that, I'm done. So thank you, Indra.
Thanks, Ali, for a wonderful talk. And we will take a 5 minutes break and come back again after 5 minutes for the 4th presentation of the day, which is current challenges in multi-scale modeling characterized by disparate time and space scales by Eliodoro Chiavazzo from Politecnico di Torino. Thank you so much. See you in 5 minutes. Hello again, welcome back. We have our next presentation from Polytechnique de Torino on challenges in multi-scale models characterized by disparate time and space scales. Professor Eliodoro Chiavazzo from the Energy Department, Polytechnique de Torino. Professor Chiavazzo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Indra, for introducing. Hope you can clearly hear me. Thanks, Indra, for organizing this dissemination event, and thanks for introducing me. So I'm Eliodoro Chiavazzo from Department of Energy of Polytechnique Torino in Italy, where I lead the multi-scale modeling laboratory. And actually, in the context of the SoFiA project, we are in charge of some modeling activities that are complementary to the ones that have been just presented by Ali. And while details on the models that have been developed on soap films will be given later on by Gabriele Falciani and Luca Bergamasco, I would like to, in a more pedagogical purpose, I would like to focus on more, general aspects related to the construction of multi-scale models and what this means. So here you see a brief outline of my presentation. I would really like to discuss briefly what we mean by mathematical model and what is the complexity which can be associated to that when constructing multi-scale models. And this will bring us to the notion, very crucial one, of good variables, good collective variables, and the way those entities can help in simplifying the models. And then we will discuss how those important entities can be extracted or formulated, and I will briefly conclude. So what is a mathematical model? Well, first thing I did, I Googled it. And so I read what is available currently in Wikipedia, for instance. So a mathematical model is a description of a system using mathematical concepts and language. Very, very obvious. We all have such kind of notion, right? Then I came across a book from two applied mathematicians. The first one happens to be also a good friend. And they give a very, engineering kind of definition. They say it's just an intellectual device that works. Very pragmatic, right? But then I would really like to give a little contribution to that also. And I will start saying that I don't really know what a mathematical model really is, but I can say what it's useful for and what it should look like. So to me, a mathematical model is basically a tool to advance our knowledge in a given field, and in that sense is a knowledge tool. And it should be formed by three main ingredients: a clear physical picture of the phenomena that we want to describe, good variables, and this is very important, I will discuss this thoroughly in the presentation, and the least number of equations involving those variables. So detailed modelings can be set up, and you have had one example described by Ali, for instance. And this is possible when you can really have, you have from the physical knowledge a clear picture of your system. So you can start from first principles, write down your detailed mathematical equations, solve the equation, and nicely get agreement with the experimental result, as Ali has shown. So this is a very clear and straightforward, logically speaking, approach. But what is the advantage of that? Of course, you can get the best possible accuracy. In principle, it does not require a significant insight from the modeler, in the sense that you don't have to really think beyond what is already known from physics. And of course, there are disadvantages. These are typically very computationally demanding models. And to the point that in many realistic cases, for engineering application, for instance, they are not even possible due to the computational demand which is requested. On the opposite side, you can take a completely different path. You can construct what is known as surrogate or mechanistic models. So you just start from observation. You use observation and your experience, intuition, knowledge about the system, write down the minimum set of equations that are required in order to describe the evolution of experimental observables, make predictions, but this time, in order to have a very nice agreement with experimental results, typically you have to include a number of fine-tuning parameters in your model so that are also based on observations and experimental results. And if you are good enough to, fine-tune your model, hopefully in the end, we'll get a very good agreement between the predictions and the results. Of course, here the underlying idea is that once you have performed parameter tuning, actually you will not touch the model anymore. But what is the advantage? Clearly, it's simple to set up, at least in principle, and it's computationally affordable. As a opposite to that, it does require a very good understanding of the system at the scale of observation, not at the fundamental level, at the scale of observation, which is not granted in general. It needs fine-tuning, and there is a huge risk, which is overfitting. What is overfitting? Well, the best way to describe overfitting is to quote what Fermi was used to say by quoting von Neumann in criticizing Dyson theory, which was actually based on many parameters. And the point is that with 4 parameters, I can fit an elephant, and with 5, I can make him wiggle his trunk. So we should really be careful with this kind of parameter fitting. Now, we all know that systems have different levels of complexity. And of course, this has to do in the first place with the number of degrees of freedom that needs to be described into the models, because this complexity will be reflected onto the model that we are going to construct. So you may have simple system, very few degrees of freedom, complicated systems, much larger number of degrees of freedom, or complex systems, for instance, when actually, for instance, in order to have a very detailed description of your gas, turbulent gas, for instance, you have to resort to like an Avogadro number of particles to be described. So moving along this line, of course, and having defined these two opposite way of setting up models, and if you map these in a chart like comparing complexity versus accuracy, the two extremes are placed in this way, but you will find in the literature all zoo of different intermediate models. All models, they know that it's easy to move along the diagonal in this plot, because it's easy to take a detailed model and take out some complexity at the cost of accuracy. And similarly, it's quite easy to take a surrogate model, increase the complexity, and paying a price in terms of accuracy. But what is ideally, what would be ideal is to move like the yellow arrows in this model. And if you manage to do that, you will get into the whole family of what we call multi-scale models that are more or less good in described reality. So again, detailed models, complexity, we should realize that complexity has not only to do with degrees of freedom, but if you think, for instance, of the turbulent flow that you see here, you want to really construct a model starting from first principle, you actually have to describe all the molecules in your system, and this this is a system that lives in that space and time scales. Here it's very natural to identify the variables in terms of which the model has to be described, the position and velocities. You write down your Newton equation, pretty much like the molecular dynamics that Ali was mentioning before. You construct your detailed model and you are fine. But the point is that there is a huge disparity in time and space scales between the observation that you are interested in and the physical phenomenon and processes that are taking place in your model. And this brings additional complexity to the model. So the question is it possible to really get rid of all the very fast and very small space and time scales, still keeping the same level of accuracy in the high-level observation, or at least pay a very little price, still reducing significantly the complexity? I will give you a detail, let's say an example. So a first example that comes to my mind that goes in this direction is detailed chemical kinetics. So assume that you have, for the sake of simplicity, you have a closed system where with a reactive mixture. For instance, you want to burn hydrogen, right? So we know that if we really want to get into the details, we don't have only, let's say, main species like hydrogen, oxygen, and water, but we will also have a number of intermediates and let's say radicals that needs to be, and all bunch of elementary reactions have to be tracked. So this makes the system a bit more complex. And this is what happens for hydrogen, which is the simplest fuel. But if you just move a step further and you look at the methane, for instance, you have to deal with 53 different species and more than 300 elementary reactions. And this, series moving up with, heavier hydrocarbons or exotic biofuels, etc., it goes exponentially. So the complexity really gets very, very high. So the point is this chemically, is this detailed chemical model, can this be, the complexity of this model, can this be reduced in an automatic fashion, still keeping the same accuracy? Well, a suggestion to this comes from thermodynamics. A suggestion how to reply to that comes from thermodynamics. If we think of the physical model that we are dealing with, of course, and we represent in the space of solution all the possible accessible, portion of this space that can be explored by the detailed chemical kinetics system, we have, of course, the red cycles. But we know that sooner or later, all these points, they will collapse onto the equilibrium state. So if you really wait enough time, then you can forget about the dynamical system. You can just impose entropy maximization, and basically you are done. Of course, there is no free lunch. What is the price to pay? You have to wait forever in order to see this contraction in the phase space of the solution. So the point is, we should realize that the scale separation in detailed models is on one hand, so a sword has two blades. So the scale separation in one end is a curse in terms of complexity that is added to the model, but is also a blessing, because it can be seen that due to the presence of time scale separation, actually the phase space that is explored typically by very complex dynamical systems are actually very low dimensional subspaces of the full space. And so if this happens, then you can think of introducing new intrinsic representation, new variables, not the ones that are used typically, the natural variables that are used to describe a given phenomenon, but new intrinsic variables that are like parameterizing nicely these subspaces. Okay, and so these are the kind of variables that I call, or in some literature, these are called good collective variables or good variables. So the way to consistently and systematically reduce the complexity of very complex system is really to substitute the natural variable, physical variable, into good, intrinsically good variables, and write a reduced number of equations in terms of these variables. So again, the definition of a model is the picture, the physical picture, good variables, and a few set of equations in terms of those variables. And this is a reduced yet accurate model. And here you see an example, for instance, again, the autoignition of homogeneous mixture of hydrogen and air. You see here the development, here have been two coarse variables have been identified and a reduced model has been constructed. Of course, it's not possible to go into the details of the technicalities, but you see it's possible by comparing the detailed and the two-dimensional reduced model to have very good accuracy or time evolution of the species in the system by paying a very little price. For instance, only some radicals are not very accurately captured, but this is, as I said, there is always a price to pay. Here is yet another system. This is homogeneous isotropic case of the full Boltzmann equation. And you know that the full Boltzmann equation describes the evolution of a distribution function for a gas, for instance. It's a very complicated model, as you might know. And for instance, if you, in this case, if you start from an initial distribution in terms of kinetic energy for the molecules of a gas that is pretty far from equilibrium, the time evolution of this distribution function in terms of in time will be described accurately by the Boltzmann equation. Of course, the kinetic energy is a continuous field, and so theoretically this is an infinite dimensional problem. But if you discretize, for instance, this is a 100-dimensional discrete model, and you identify consistently the reduced collective variables, you will realize that with maximum a dozen of these coarse variables, it's actually possible to track the full evolution described by the Boltzmann equation. So I would really like to stress the fact that this coarse good variables are key, not only in kinetic models, but also in general in material science. And in order to do that, I would like to quote the abstract of a paper that was very inspiring to me and appeared in Physics in PRL a few years ago. So it says that statistical learning of material properties or function so far start with a largely silent and non-challenged step, which is the choice of the set of descriptive parameters. So this step is many times in the scientific literature just silent and unchallenged, but is crucial actually for setting up very good models. And if you think of it, this problem was always there. And I will give you a very brilliant example that is from this paper, very good example of choosing the right coarse variables is, if you think of it, the periodic tables. Because this is a two-dimensional representation of very complex entities, which are the chemical elements. And think of it, this representation, you know better than me, I mean, in the early days, there were white spots in this representation, but still, by looking at the descriptors, people could infer the properties of the elements in advance with respect to the discovery of the elements itself. So it's a very powerful and very notion if you manage to get these good variables and descriptor of a problem. So the natural question is, who gives us good variables? Well, there is an obvious answer to that. Scientists have always used human intuition and experience, but this is quite frustrating because there might be complex problem where we are not able to. And so that's why today there are modern artificial intelligence algorithms that are aiming at making this good variable choice automatic. But now I would like to give you a few examples of how human intuition can work. And a few years ago, we were interested in understanding, using molecular dynamics, the tools that Alias described, what really rules water self-diffusion coefficient under strong nano-confinement environment, like water in nanopores or nanopores loaded with nanoparticles, or water in nanotubes, or water around proteins, etc. Is there any good descriptor that will rule this quantity? The motivation was that we were collaborating with some scientists in nanomedicine, and knowing this happens to a very important implication in designing contrast agents for MRI. So we were performing a lot of simulations, different cases, and we're trying to smartly combine some geometrical notion from the particles with the force fields, so the forces that are exerted between the particles and the water, in order to come up with a recipe that will actually give us a good descriptor. And I won't go into the details, this will bring us very far, but it happens that this theta, that only depends on geometry and force field of your particles, really is in a very good correlation with the self-diffusion of water in this strong nano-confined environment of water. What do you need to do all this? Well, very good collaborators and a lot of patience to analyze the data. Again, another human intuition, another example based on human intuition, we were asking ourselves what determines the apparent physical properties of a nanosuspension of nanoparticles in water. So like viscosity or apparent viscosity or apparent thermal conductivity, starting from the features of the particles when you have particles and surfactant in a solution. So what we did completely, we started from we follow a sort of bottom-up approach. So we were using molecular dynamic simulation, extract potential mean force between the particles, then pass this kind of information to a Brownian dynamics, make cluster analysis, put this information in a continuum level model, and verify that actually there is agreement with the between the predicted apparent physical properties of the suspension and the experiments. So again, this is based on intuition, what kind of good variables should be passed from a skill to the other, and what you need again is a very good PhD student. The third will be addressed by Gabriele Falciani and Luca Bergamasco, and the third example will build upon the interface between continuum modeling and molecular modeling done at ECTP. So I won't I will not spend much detail on that. But I would like to give you a few insights on the ongoing efforts related to the artificial intelligence algorithm that are currently used in order to extract automatically these good features. So we have said that already, that basically good features have to do with the parameterization of low-dimensional embeddings in high-dimensional spaces. And so one approach that is searching for good features is diffusion maps. It's a technique invented at Yale in 2005, 2006 by Ralph Koifman and collaborator. And basically, in order to give you, of course, there is no time for details, but in order to give you the idea what is done here, imagine that you have, let's say, observations, a set of observations that are in a three-dimensional space, but in fact, they are very close to a cylindrical surface. So effectively, this is a two-dimensional problem into a three-dimensional space, just for the sake of simplicity. We know in advance that the good variables, the intrinsic good variable will be the zeta and the theta, the two cylindrical coordinates. But we pretend we do not know that, and we automatically use diffusion maps. So our diffusion maps will give us two learned variables that they are not really the theta and the zeta, but they are one-to-one related to that. So for computational purposes are very useful. Another possible approach is variational autoencoders. And actually imagine to have a very special neural networks that has topologically this very peculiar shape. So you start from high-dimensional observation and you manage to train this network in order to boil down the description of this observation to a very few parameters, and then go back again to the reconstruction. If this reconstruction is successful, then you have well-trained your network, and the good intrinsic variable are in the neck of this funnel. So why is this important? Well, one application that we have explored in the recent past is using this kind of knowledge and algorithm simulations. And reaction coordinates, again, are good variables of a system at the macro level. So imagine that you want to explore fast enough the conformation of complex molecules. And a very important example here is the folding-unfolding problem of proteins. So imagine that you are locked with your protein conformation into a metastable state, right? So you will only explore very small piece of the effective free energy landscape. So just take this high-dimensional observation, use artificial intelligence tools in order to create a low-dimensional embedding, identify the boundary of that, extrapolate outward, lift back to high-dimensional space again. This will give you new initial conditions which have been unexplored by your model. And by starting from that point, you can again rerun your simulation and speed up the exploration of your free energy landscape. The good thing about this is that you do not need, if you use this algorithm, you do not need to know in advance the reaction coordinates and therefore the good variables of your system. You will discover this as the simulation goes on. And this was, for instance, applied to a system. This is a dimer, MGA dimer, which is known to be in the lipidic layer of eukaryotic cells. And it was recently demonstrated that this plays a very important biological function. This is a lipid saturation sensor. In fact, is a molecular sensor. And so actually we're using this kind of approach in order to start from the non-conformation, make a couple of steps with the approach that I have told you, and try to see if there are any unexplored conformations that are not known. And indeed, we managed in a couple of simulation steps to get to some conformation that were have been unseen during a month of simulation using, brute force approach. So conclusions, good variables are the heart of consistent and accurate multi-scale model, although this is again a silent and unchallenged, still unchallenged step. There are several artificial intelligence algorithms today that are available to discover new good variables that allow us to make consistent and accurate multi-scale models. But I would like to conclude with a quotation from the seminal paper of Peters, and which was from 2016. And I think it's still like that, because these artificial intelligence tools are still based on fine-tuning and some parameters that you have to input. So I think it's fair to say still that human intuition remains the best source of trial coordinates and mechanistic hypotheses. And there is no procedure yet for having an epiphany in that respect. And I think it's still like that. So with that, I would like to acknowledge some funding and you for the kind attention.
Thank you so much for this nice talk, and we take a 5-minute break, and we will come back then for the final talk of the workshop, for the session today and for the workshop. And it will be the social and economic aspect of collaborative interdisciplinary research, the SoFiA case study by Professor Alessandra Colombelli from Politecnico di Torino. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Bye. Hello again, Indro Nielsen again here from SoFiA Tech Park Studio. Welcome back. I remain corrected. The next presentation actually is going to be from Gabriele Falciani from Politecnico di Torino, and it is going to be on modeling soap film at meso and macro scales. And after him, we have the final presentation from Professor Alexandra Colombelli, the social and economic aspects of collaborative interdisciplinary research. So, Gabriele, the floor is yours. Please share your screen and we will enjoy this conversation.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. So, thank you, Indra, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon. I'm Gabriele Falciani, a PhD student at the Department of Energy of Politecnico di Torino in Italy. And first of all, I would like to thank you, Indra, for organizing this very interesting workshop. I'm very happy to be here, and I will present some results on the modeling of soap film and soap bubble at meso and macro scales. So, as Dr. Yusra Timonei explained in detail yesterday in her presentation, liquid form behavior depends on a lot of processes which occur at different time and space scales. So various modeling tools are necessary to investigate this complex nature of forms. Regarding this presentation, it is divided in two parts. So the first one, where I will show you how we model the gas transport across a single soap film membrane at continuum level, and how we incorporated the atomistic details coming from the molecular dynamics simulation performed at ICTP by Dr. Assanali and Dr. Franklin. In the second part of this presentation, I will briefly introduce the challenges of the modeling of soap bubble fluid dynamics, and these activities just started. And Dr. Luca Bergamasco is responsible actually for this work. So, as I was saying, I'm now considering a single soap film. And you see here in black and red, the two surfactant monolayers, and in light blue, the water core of the soap film. So in the case of the SoFiA project, this soap film is dividing in two chambers in a CO2 environment. And this two surfactant has been engineered so that they can perform some catalytic reaction, as Professor Bonnet showed yesterday. So the two half reaction of carbon dioxide reduction and oxygen evolution are occurring in the two opposite sides of this membrane. And the soap film actually is separating the two produced gas. However, these gases will tend to diffuse from one side to the other of the membrane, driven by the presence of a concentration gradient. And so we need to understand this gas permeation dynamics in order to understand the time scale of this diffusing process, since we do not want that our fuel, the CO, is diffusing in the other compartment, and the same for the oxygen. So we developed the multi-scale modeling that I'm going to present. And actually, all this part is that deals with the gas transport across soap film membrane comes from this article that we published together with Ali Assanali and Riccardo Franklin from ICTP, who performed the atomistic simulation, Alan Kanya from Techlist Scientific, who carried out experimental activities, and Daniel Sen from Uppsala University. Eliodoro Chiavazzo is actually my tutor here at Politecnico. So from the macroscopic point of view, you can look at the soap film as a continuum mean separating the two gas chambers. But of course, if you start zooming at the water surfactant gas interface, you start realizing that some complexity starts appearing, and so you will need a more accurate model in order to properly describe this complexity. Okay. If you look in literature, the molar rate of the permeating gas so from one side to the other of the soap film, can be expressed in two ways. The first one involves the global permeability K of the soap film, the surface area of the soap film, and the disparity in concentration of the gas in the two gas phases at the end of the soap film. The second formula here in the center of the slide tells you that the same molar rate is also proportional to this KML, which is called the monolayer permeability, to the same A, the area of the soap film, and to difference in concentration between the equilibrium concentration of the permeating gas in the liquid and the actual concentration of the gas in the film. So as you can see in this KML are summarized all the interaction between the gas and the surfactants molecule. So this K and this KML are the two essential parameters in order to make prediction on gas transport phenomena across soap film. And these are related with this formula here, where the uppercase H is the Henry-Law constant, so the solubility of the gas in the water. The lowercase h is the thickness of the water core, and the D is the diffusion coefficient of the gas in water. Here, the KML1 is the monolayer permeability of the first surfactant monolayer, while KML2 is the monolayer permeability of the second surfactant monolayer. So, from a molecular dynamics simulation performed by our colleagues at ICTP, you have already seen this picture a few minutes ago, projected by Dr. Sanali. And we were able to investigate the density probability profile of water, of the gas, and of the surfactant. So if we look at the CO2 and how it diffuses through the gas surfactant water interface, from this density plot, we can see that the carbon dioxide actually appears to be kinetically trapped in the hydrophobic part of the surfactant in a nearly 2 nanometer region. So from this molecular dynamics simulation, we were able to compute the energy barrier that is affecting the transport of CO2 from the gas phase to the liquid phase. And this will be a crucial input in order to couple the atomistic simulation and the continuum model. So regarding the latter, it has been implemented in a COMSOL multiphysics platform, and we benchmarked it with experimental data from literature. So on the left side of the slide, you see this experiment taken from the seminal work of Prinsen and co-workers, where they measure the permeability K and the monolayer permeability for different gases. Here, this molar flux is proportional to the difference in pressure inside and outside the bubble due to the Laplace pressure and the radius, the curvature radius of this bubble. In the model, we simulated this delta P as an imposed concentration difference, which is varying in time. So here you see the result. And in this plot, beta 0 is somehow related to the radius of the bubble. And also, if we include the uncertainties in the measurement of the thickness of the soap film, the agreement between experimental data and modeling is rather good. So now we have validated our model, but how we can use it? So until now, we can use it essentially for sensitivity analysis. Indeed, for example, if you know the pressure difference across the soap film, then you can span the film thickness and the monolayer permeability to predict the molar flow rate across the soap film. In this map on the right, you see in the two axes, the film thickness and the monolayer permeability, which is linked directly to the surfactant typology and interaction with the gas. And these isolines represent the normalized flux for a given delta P. So as you can see from the design map, the molar flux through the soap film is more sensible to the film thickness than to the monolayer permeability. However, if we are moving to common black film or Newtonian black film, the kind of surfactant starts to be much and much more important. However, this monolayer permeability that I was talking about is not a trivial quantity, and you may not find it in literature for a particular surfactant. Hence, we develop a kind of predictive approach that could tell us, given some exotic surfactant, as the one that we are using in our photosynthetic membrane, its monolayer permeability without making a new experiment on mass flow rate. And this is what we did when we incorporated the details from atomistic simulation. In particular, we include the free energy landscape from molecular dynamics simulation that I showed to you before in a drift diffusion model described by a Smoluchowski equation at continuum level. In order, this has been done in order to extrapolate an effective diffusion coefficient DML for an equivalent Fickian formulation. So if you look at a bit at this equation, this flux, here this first term is just simple Fickian diffusion. However, since we have an underlying potential, this new term arises. So combining the info of the film thickness of the monolayer delta, namely the thickness of the potential barrier, and this diffusion coefficient in the surfactant monolayer, we were able to estimate the monolayer permeability. So now we have a fully coupled multi-scale model that can predict this quantity, this monolayer permeability, and allow us to make some prediction on the gas permeation molar rate. So in conclusion, we set up a fully coupled atomistic continuum model in order to describe gas transport across soft-field membrane. And this is crucial to understand how long the produced fuel and the oxygen will be separated in the future device. And this is the first step, and now we are working on adding the chemical reaction to our continuum model. So until now, I have talked about the transport of gas across a single membrane, but what happens when we are dealing with one or more bubbles that are flowing, and so in 2D or 3D, 3 dimension. So here we are working still at continuum level, where water is simulated as a continuum mean, while the two surfactant monolayer are introduced by considering a variation in the surface tension. So in this very brief second part, I will just show to you the many challenges that must be faced in order to perform this bubble flow dynamics, namely the computational limits, the problem of understanding the rheology of the bulk liquid, and in understanding the contact behavior with the walls. Okay, in this here in the center of the slide, you see depicted a soap bubble moving in a two-dimensional domain as a first case study. We are using this open source code called Basilisk in order to perform this computational fluid dynamics simulation that of the bubble flow. As you can see from this picture on the left, the software divides the domain, this white space here, in which the bubble is moving, in different small squares, and solves the partial differential equation that describes the motion of this bubble for each of these little square. This is actually called the finite volumes method. And as you can see, these squares become smaller and denser approaching the soap film. This occurs because we want to describe precisely this film, which is very, very thin, while on the other hand, the bubble is actually quite large. Of course, in order to get higher accuracy, we have to increase the number of these squares. However, also the computational time increases. So the first challenge is to efficiently compute the bubble dynamics, considering that we have to take into account the micrometer or nanometer thickness of the soap film and the centimeter scale of the bubble. The second challenge deals with the rheology of the bulk liquid. The surfactant modify not only the surface tension of a bubble, but also the viscosity of the liquid inside the film. The soap film cannot be modeled as a simple layer of water, which is a Newtonian liquid, but rather it should be modeled as a liquid where density and viscosity are varying. In other words, this means that the local visto-elascoplastic effects may be not negligible. Furthermore, this, if the thickness or the curvature of the soap film changes, this will induce a Marangoni flow from one part to the other of the soap film. The third challenge deals with the difficulty in the description of the contact behavior between the bubble and the wall of the channels, as you can see on from this picture on the right, which is showing a bubble flow meter, where these thin films actually flows from the bottom to the upper side. And more complex case is this Y junction, where these two films are approaching to each other. So now we don't have only the contact of the bubbles with the walls of the film, but also the contact between the two different films, which complicates the computation. With this, I have finished my presentation, and I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to thank all the partners in the consortium, and also the research group of Eliodoro Chiavazzo at Politecnico, where I'm studying and working. Thank you, and I have finished.
Thank you, Gabriele, for this talk. We take another 5 minutes of break, and after that we will come back to the final presentation of the day, which will be the social and economic aspect of collaborative interdisciplinary research, a case study by Professor Alessandra Colombelli from Politecnico di Torino. Thank you, stay tuned, and we will be back in 5 minutes. Bye. Hello again and welcome back. So we have our last speaker, Professor Alexandra Colombelli from Polytechnique de Torino. Alexandra, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you please?
Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to activate my video. Okay. Okay, can you hear me, see me, and see my video? Okay, so thank you, Indra, for introducing me. I'm Alessandra Colombelli from Politecnico di Torino. I'm a management engineer, and together with Chiara Ravetti in the SoFiA project, I work on the social and economic aspects of the project. In this presentation today, I will provide you an overview of the impact and the relevance of a collaborative interdisciplinary research in PhET project with a focus on social and economic aspects. So interdisciplinarity is a key priority for the EU research and innovation policy, and it is a general objective of all H2020 projects according to the European Commission. But why? The belief is that interdisciplinary research is helpful to find solutions for complex grand challenges, and it helps in finding this solution in less time and more effectively. It is also believed that interdisciplinary research can contribute to generate new and radical knowledge that can contribute to not just to technological change, but also to economic and social change more in general. And this kind of research is also more demand-driven and maybe less technology push. And also this kind of interdisciplinary research may help in leverage also unexpected synergies within these multidisciplinary teams. And finally, policymakers also believe that it is important to bridge the gap between the research community and the real world. So if we want that the research have a high impact on the real world, interdisciplinarity is considered very important. And interdisciplinarity is particularly relevant for PhET project. In this respect, within this kind of project, multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity goes hand in hand with radical novel technologies, disruptive and transformative innovation, long-term vision, scientific excellence, but it is relevant and key because it is a prerequisite of this other key feature of the PhET project. And the relevance of interdisciplinarity is also evident from the results of a consultation that has been conducted within the H2020 PhET project. And as you can see from this figure, and in particular from the orange line within in the radar, the collaboration among multidisciplinary communities is considered the most relevant feature of PhET project. But why? One of the reasons is, as you can see from the quotes I put in this slide, and in particular from the last quote, one of the reasons why multidisciplinarity is very important is that the collaboration among STEM and social sciences can bring to shareable knowledge capable to bring advancement in science, technology, and our society. So in other words, one of the key aspects of multidisciplinarity is the integration of social sciences and the human sciences with STEM fields. And this is a well-recognized need. The European Commission strongly believe that social sciences and humanities and the integration of social sciences and humanities with science and engineering is a key, and in particular is key in the case of technical breakthrough and in the case of a radical innovation that are expected to exert a high social impact. But why? Because social sciences can contribute in identifying new societal needs. For example, they contribute in identifying and in developing more demand-driven innovation process as compared to technology push innovation process, and is also helpful in adopting an out-of-the-box approach in science, which is considered very relevant for breakthrough innovation. But what is the impact of interdisciplinarity in PhET project, the real impact? It has been found, first of all, it has been found that in general, such projects have a high impact on scientific productivity. So in general, this kind of project show a higher number of scientific articles published out of the project. It also, these kind of projects also have an impact on a scientist mindset, as it has been found that scientists in this kind of project develop a market-oriented and impact-oriented mindset. But they also have an high impact on the economy because it has been found that PhET projects are associated with high number of patents, high number of spin-offs and technology transfer agreement. And so we can, at the end, it has been found a strong impact on the economy and the society as a whole. But an important result is that this kind of project are important in terms of interdisciplinary impact. It has been found that this project stretch across multiple disciplines. As you can see from this figure, the 36% of the projects, of FET projects, have a broad stretch, meaning that they have an impact on more than 20 scientific fields, while the 54% have a medium stretch. But so far I have presented you and discussed the policymakers' perspective on interdisciplinary research. But what is the scientist perspective on this? In particular, what are the advantages, the perceived advantages of interdisciplinary research from the scientist's perspective? From this perspective, it has been found that so an important advantage is the possibility to capitalize on a broad range of expertise. So in other terms, the variety of knowledge and expertise and competencies can really lead to strong advancement in the research, and they can really generate new knowledge, new radical technologies. Another advantage is related with the specialization of tasks, and in particular, scientists perceive that they can save costs by specializing tasks. So it is also interdisciplinary research is also cost effective. Another key advantage is that this kind of research can stimulate creativity. So usually within a homogeneous research team, usually the perspective is more or less the same, and maybe this can limit creativity, while by combining multiple perspectives and expertise can really help in generating new creative ideas, and this helps in creating also unexpected synergies. Of course, this kind of research also is also associated with some challenges, and in one of the challenges is related with the use of different language and terminology. So usually scientists found it difficult to communicate among different teams because of this different language. Different teams that also pertain to different domains may also show differences in the way they organize work, experiments, and this create differences in operations that can be again another challenge. Another one is prioritization. So in this kind of project, it's sometimes difficult to set priorities because the result of one experiment, of one team in one specific domain can be useful and can be input for other teams, other domain, other experiment, but it is difficult to set priorities. Another challenge relates with the sharing process, and in particular the sharing of data, results, and credits. So of course different teams pertaining to different domains can have can face challenges in acknowledging the results and to share the intellectual property generating during the project. So let's go now more in depth in the SoFiA experience. So the SoFiA project is highly interdisciplinary. It brings together teams from the domain of chemistry, engineering, physics, and also economics. We administered a survey to the member of the SoFiA project, and as you can see from this word cloud, the interdisciplinarity of the project is very high. So we asked to team members to describe their specific domain of research, and this is the picture we obtained. So as you can see, there is a high degree of interdisciplinarity. We also asked to team members to indicate the main advantage of interdisciplinary research in the SoFiA project. And as you can see, one of the main advantages of the SoFiA project is related with the broad range of expertise and also unexpected synergies. So within the SoFiA project, so the variety of knowledge that can generate new knowledge appears to be a very key advantage of this kind of research. While specialization, so the advantages associated to specialization appears to be less relevant to the SoFiA project. We also ask to indicate that the main challenges for interdisciplinary research within the SoFiA project. And as you can see, the main challenge is related with the different language and terminology. So while putting together a variety of knowledge, expertise, and scientific field is considered important, the team also perceived that this kind of differences also create some difficulties in communication within the project. Another challenge is related with the more complex sharing process. So the sharing of data, results, credit, and intellectual property is an issue and deserve attention. While the other challenges like differences in operation and priorities seem under control and less relevant within our project. But let's go also more in depth the socioeconomic aspect of a SoFiA project. And the project, first of all, respond to one of the SDG, in particular, the need for an affordable clean energy. The expected societal impacts are quite broad and range from health benefit, because of course, if you reduce pollution from energy generation, you can benefit in this respect, but also the outreach is another important impact. So it is expected that thanks to the modularity of this technology, even remote communities in developing countries can be reached. So a number of economic and societal benefits are expected, but the real impact of the project also depends upon the economic viability and the understanding of market actors crucial for success. In other words, the technology can really have a strong impact, but it it is really important to understand the right business model in order to develop a sustainable business out of this technology. We also asked in our survey an opinion to project members, and we asked what is the main economic or social need you see for the project. And as you can see, the majority of the team members think that the economic viability of the technology in terms of cost is the most important economic and social need within this project. Another relevant need is identifying investors to scale up the results, and both these two needs are related, and again call for the importance of finding the right business model. While it seems that the market potential, the expected impacts are already clear, under control, so there is no perceived need in this respect. So concluding, the SoFiA experience is in line with the experience of other FET projects, in particular with respect to the high level of interdisciplinarity, and because within this project we integrate STEM competencies with the social sciences competencies. The main perceived challenge has to do with the economic viability of the technology in terms of cost. So to conclude, in order to really have have a strong impact on the society. So at the end, for the success of the SoFiA project, the business model development appears to be key. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and I leave the floor to Indra for the conclusions.
The wonderful talk. So we conclude today. Today was the second and the final day for the online workshop, the first online workshop for project SoFiA, soap film-based artificial photosynthesis, a connecting bridge, soap films and artificial photosynthesis. I hope all the viewers enjoyed, and also please note that the videos which are live now will be available both in Facebook and on YouTube from the SoFiA Tech Park website, but also I will post the link at the SoFiA project website, which is www.sofiaproject.eu. So you can also directly access these videos, the recorded videos, and watch the videos over and over again as much as you want. And please send us comments, questions, and our speakers will do their best to answer your comments and questions. So with that, I again remind ourselves that we are at unprecedented times, and the next few months probably are going to be crucial because of the political situation in US, how it will develop. And for the world, we are looking forward how it can be shaped in a better way. Our SoFiA project is dedicated towards a better world through a clean energy solution, and we keep our fingers crossed and our bodies strong and minds clear so that we can work on it and deliver a solution as soon as possible for the world and for the society and for us and our children. And so I leave you with a wish for our families, our friends, our peers, and the whole world to be healthy, to have clarity of mind, and to do our best for the next generation and for the earth, for ourselves. Thank you so much. Bye. This is Indranil Sen.